Hello, I am Qasim Fawaz, an assistant professor at UW Madison. I will be talking about the research that we did in the past 2 years about the impact of the GDPR on privacy policies. This is a joint work between a bunch of us at UW Madison and Hamza, who was in EPFL at the time. The GDPR, or the General Data Protection Regulation, is the EU's approach to regulating the data privacy of individuals. It passed in 2016 and was implemented in 2018. Among many things, it provides guidelines for data processing to be followed by service providers or companies. At the time, the GDPR was the first and most comprehensive privacy legislation. The GDPR really places an emphasis on privacy disclosure. It mandates that service providers need to inform users about their privacy practices. Service providers and companies need to communicate their privacy practices clearly to their users, and they need to inform the users about their data collection rights in terms of data edits, data requests, and deletion. And if you have not guessed it by now, privacy policies are the main venue or main channel of communicating these privacy disclosures. You know, these lengthy documents that we agree on every time we visit a website or create an account. So that's why, if you still remember, we have received these privacy policy updates back in May 2018. Effectively, companies were scrambling to meet the GDPR implementation deadline. So a natural question arose at the time. How did the GDPR actually impact the landscape of privacy policies? And that's the main question that we try to answer in this paper. Now, a thorough study of the GDPR's impact on the landscape of privacy policies requires an in-depth analysis of a large number of privacy policies. Obviously, such a manual analysis does not scale. In this paper, we meet this challenge by providing a main contribution. We provide an automated framework to analyze privacy policies at scale. Using this automated framework, we show the results of this analysis by studying how privacy policies changed before and after the enforcement of the GDPR. So to study how privacy policies have changed, we focus on two sets of questions. The first set is context agnostic. Content agnostic questions cover the timelines of privacy policy updates, the change of users' perceptions of privacy policies, and the evolution in the text or the textual features. Then we look at content-aware aspects. We cover three questions. Are policies doing a better job at covering major topics of privacy? Are policies including the detailed information required by the GDPR? And are they being explicit about their privacy practices? Or are they being a bit ambiguous in describing the privacy practices? So these are the two major parts of this talk. First, we're gonna start by covering the content agnostic set of questions, and then we're gonna follow by the content aware set of questions. However, before we get into the analysis part, we need to describe what is the data set of privacy policy that we analyzed. So our first step was to curate a representative set of privacy policies. Essentially, we looked at two sets of policies, one representing EU countries and the other one more global. So for the EU set, we queried the Alexa top site API for the top 3,000 domains for each of the EU's 28 member states. This included UK at the time. This resulted in 35,000 unique URLs. For the global set, we queried the Alexa website information service for the top 1,000 popular domains in 25 categories. This resulted in 22,000 unique URLs. Then, looking at each URL, we extracted candidate privacy policy pages. We looked at the homepage of each URL, and then we queried the first hop links of each of the links at the homepage URL by looking at the privacy-related keywords, like privacy page, privacy, term, and etc. Now, looking at these candidate pages, 10,000 candidate EU pages, 14,000 candidate global pages, we wanted to see if these refer to actual privacy policies or not. Towards that end, we designed a special classifier that relies on NLP techniques to classify whether this page or this HTML page is a privacy policy or not. Applying this classifier left us with nearly 5,000 privacy policy URLs for the EU set and around 3,600 privacy policy URLs for the global set. Now, for each identified policy, we queried the Wayback Machine to get the snapshots from 2016 to 2019. We looked at all of these snapshots. We extracted the text from the snapshots. We did analysis of how the privacy policies changed over time, and that we ended around 3,000 pairs of EU policies before and after the GDPR, and 3,600 pairs of global policies covering before and after the GDPR. Now, to determine what is a pre-GDPR version and a post-GDPR version of a privacy policy, we looked at the most significant change in the policy for each domain. And we looked at the change date of each policy that's closest to May 2018. So the first policy before that significant change date, we called it the pre-GDPR policy, and the most recent one referred to it as the post-GDPR policy. So let's recap. At this point, we ended up with two sets of policies: an EU set of policy covering 3,000 pairs of policies, and a global set covering around 3,600 pairs of policies. Our first set of analysis questions looks at the timeline of the updates, the user perception, and the evolution of the text features. So let's start by analyzing the timeline of the privacy policy updates. These two charts show for each set the distribution of the key change date of the policies. Now, the key change date is the closest date to May 2018 and which the policy was changed significantly. So it's not surprising to see that May 2018 in both cases was a significant inflection point. The vast majority of the policies changed around that date. And this answers our first question. The GDPR actually did shift the landscape of privacy policy. For the rest of this talk, we're gonna be discussing how did it shift the landscape of privacy policies. We first start by looking whether users have perceived a change in the policy presentation. And we do that by performing an online user study using Amazon Mechanical Turk with 470 participants. We follow a within subjects design. We show each participant 20 policy snapshots from pre and post GDPR for both global and EU sets, thereby exposing each participant to all the conditions of the study. For each snapshot, we ask the participant to indicate their agreements with each of these three statements on a 5-point Likert scale. For the global data set, we notice small improvement in presentation without showing any statistical significance. So as you can see that this agreement rate went a little bit down while the agreement rate was a bit higher for these three statements, but not for all of them. For the EU dataset, we noticed higher improvement. Note that the participants, because of the within subjects design study, saw a mix of the EU and global policies. After multiple hypothesis correction, we observed that the improvement was actually significant for the first two statements, meaning that the participants who saw the EU set of policies noted that the policies have more attractive appearance after the GDPR, and the policies have cleaner and more simple presentation after the GDPR. The last step of the content agnostic analysis was looking at the textual features of privacy policies. In particular, we look at the length of the policy, as well as the passive voice index. For both sets, the policies got considerably longer, as you can see from the number of syllables, the number of words, and the number of sentences. However, the sentence structure remained similar. We observed similar sentence length. The number of words per sentence was pretty much the same pre and post GDPR for both sets, and the passive index was very similar or practically the same between pre and post GDPR EU policies and global policies. So policies got longer, but their structure did not change much in terms of English. The second part of our work is about performing automated analysis of the privacy policy content. We look at how their coverage of privacy policies or privacy topics changed, how do they meet key components of the GDPR, and how specific they are in describing the privacy practices. Now, before getting to the results, we'll briefly describe the automated analysis framework that allows us to leave these results. Our analysis framework is based on the tagging the privacy policy text according to a privacy taxonomy from Wilson et al. From ACL 2016. This taxonomy is multi-level. The first covers the high-level privacy categories, such as first-party collection, policy change, data retention, etc. This snapshot over here is just showing a part of the taxonomy, not all of the taxonomy. The second level is the set of attributes belonging to a single category. For example, the data retention category has 3 attributes. These attributes are the retention period, the purpose, and the information type. Finally, each attribute assumes a set of values. For example, the retention period over here has 4 attributes, the stated, unspecified, limited, or indefinite. We use policies from our previous work to automatically tag each policy according to the previous taxonomy. Policies is an automated framework for privacy policy analysis, and it works by breaking each policy into a set of segments. This is, for example, a privacy policy text that's broken into a bunch of segments, and here we show examples of 2 of the segments. Then it assigns each segment 1 or more privacy category. These are the blue ones you can see over here, and a bunch of attribute value pairs, as you can see over here. So for example, this is an example of an attribute value pair where the personal information type is generic personal information, or the purpose is legal requirement. And the nice thing about policies is that it enables an API to automatically query the tags of a policy. So effectively, policies makes the privacy policy machine readable. Using this machine readable representation, we can map our analysis to queries on these tags. Look at this query as an example. It returns 1 if there are segments satisfying this clause. The category of the privacy policy is third party, and the purpose is unspecified. It then filters the segments by matching their tags. This is an example segment that matches the clause. For example, it describes sharing, which is the third party category over here, and that describes the purpose, which is advertising. So this policy, because it has a segment satisfying this clause, will get a score of 1, for example. And we use this methodology to construct queries for coverage, compliance, and specificity, as we're gonna see now. And so now that we have discussed how we automatically query policies, we start with privacy policy coverage. Our coverage analysis looks at the portion of the policies that cover these high-level privacy categories, and those are extracted by the Wilson et al. Taxonomy. We determined that a privacy policy covers a category if at least one of its segments is tagged with this category by policies. As evident from the both charts over here, the GDPR had a positive impact on the coverage of privacy policies or privacy topics, meaning that the post-GDPR policies had higher coverage of these categories. And this can be noticed or viewed by looking at the green bars that increase to be the blue bars for each of the privacy categories for the EU and the global policy. We also observe a significant improvement in topics or in areas that are critical to the GDPR. For example, we can see that the data retention had a significant improvement, and special audiences also had a significant improvement before and after the GDPR. We also manually verified the results of this automated analysis. Please look at the paper for more details. Next, we look at how much privacy policies comply with the guidelines in the GDPR by looking at the ICO requirements. So we look at the GDPR checklist from the UK's ICO, or Information Commissioner's Office. We focus on 7 items that can be readily represented as queries on policy-generated tags. Afterwards, we study how did the policy's compliance with the items changed after the GDPR. Now, for particular or for specific implementations of these queries in first order logic queries on GDPR, on policy-generated tags, please check the paper. So we look at how many portions of the policies incorporated the GDPR requirements. We find that most of the policies incorporate the new requirements, and this can be viewed by looking at the summation of the purple and gray portions of each part, which represent the majority of the policies for each of the queries. We also find that the EU policies show better improvement, and surprisingly, still, a healthy portion of the policies are not compliant, and that can be observed by looking at the yellow portions of each bar. This indicates that companies still have some work to do. These are 2 examples of policies moving in opposite directions. The website's onlyfans.com no longer includes a statement about notifying users about changes in the policy. So this statement, which was there in the pre-GDPR version, no longer exists in the post-GDPR version. On the opposite direction, NY Times added a new section covering policy change in its post-GDPR section, which is this green text over here. Finally, we study how specific are policies in describing their privacy practices. In particular, we look at how much policies are specific in describing types of information, third parties, and purposes of data collection, sharing, and retention. Now, this dimension is orthogonal to compliance. A privacy policy can make a blanket statement that satisfies a GDPR clause, such as, we share your personal data with third parties, but it might not specify the actual type of the personal data shared. So this is why we look at specificity as an additional dimension to compliance. This chart shows how specificity changed after the GDPR. We find that a significant portion of the policies are less specific, especially for the queries Q6 and Q7, which covered first-party collection and third-party sharing. This can be observed by looking at the green portion of the bars over here. We hypothesize that policies attempted to be more inclusive of their practices, but at the cost of being less specific. So this is an example of a less specific policy segment from hrc.org. The pre-GDPR version of the policy included specific types of data shared with their third parties, while the post-GDPR version was not specific. It only mentions personal information. Other policies, such as this example from legacy.com, have become more specific. In summary, we presented an automated framework to understand the impact of the GDPR on EU and global sets of privacy policies. We found that the effect of the GDPR was more pronounced in the EU region. However, policies have become longer on average at the expense of transparency and full disclosure. Finally, our complete data set and analysis code are available on GitHub at this link over here. And thank you for listening to this talk.